Hi, I'm Riz Mirza, and welcome to the first part of a very special five-part interview with the amazing, late, great Alex Murray, one of the world's greatest psychic mediums and trance channels. And many of you who are watching knew Alex and perhaps sat in his Tuesday night class and got messages from him that changed your life. I'm one of those people. I met Alex when I was 27, a long time ago in New York City in the 90s. And he changed my life, the course of my life. And my love for him is very deep and great and hard to explain. Probably the same for many of you who knew him. So let me just tell you very quickly how this all started to have this interview that you're watching. In December of 2021, my dear friend Cameron Barnett, a filmmaker, was in New York City on a shoot. And he called myself and my wife, Oriah, here in Los Angeles. And he said he had a very strong intuitive hit that we needed to go see my teacher and to film him. He had all his equipment, and he said, let's just go, and why don't you call Alex and see if he'd be willing to sit with us. So I called him, and yes, he was willing. He said, I'm not feeling very well these days. And I could hear that his voice was weaker than I had remembered. But I think he knew that we needed to do this. So he said yes, and we went there. And he was a real trooper, and he sat through the interview. And once he got rolling, all the funny stories started coming up about how he became who he is. And he was a very private person. A lot of people knew him for years, but didn't have a chance to know these little details about how he grew up. So I'm very honored to have been able to sit with him in this way. In all those years, I never sat with Alex. And all the years that I learned from him and thought I was close to him, there were so many things I didn't know. So I hope that you enjoy this. We were sitting in his apartment on the Upper West Side, and that's where he held his famous Tuesday nights. And you'll recognize the apartment if you've been there. So please enjoy this. And Alex, I know that you're watching. I hope that I did you justice in some way. And hey, leave your comments and your memories of Alex here. And there's going to be 4 more parts coming up. So stay tuned to watch those as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you, Alex. We love you. Alex, thank you so much for sitting and talking with me. These are questions or topics that I've wanted to ask you probably for 25 years. I've known you 25 years. I can't believe all this time has gone.
Yeah, I know.
So I just want to start off with, when did you first know that you were psychic, and how did that lead to channeling spirit guides?
Well, actually, it kind of came in the reverse order. I was walking and talking in my sleep as an infant, as a child. And my mother would say that afterwards, she says, I don't know what you're up to. She says, but you stand up in the middle of the bed and speak in foreign languages that we can't understand. And of course, we didn't have little recorders to run around with, so my mother just told me about this. And I remember my father alluded to the fact that the old saying was, you've been vaccinated with a phonograph needle. I never stopped talking. So my father used to say, you should have a captive audience. You should be a minister. You'd have a captive audience. Well, that was the first prediction that came true, because I did become an ordained minister later in my life. But that was very interesting. The other thing that happened, which was a very great psychic scar, was I was listening to the radio. I was about 8 years old. And this is a rather ugly thing to say, but I was listening to classical music, which I liked from the very beginning. I became a classic musician. I played the cello and eventually the bass. And I was always drawn to classical music, vocal music, choral music, of course, and instrumental music. So I'm listening to the radio, and in the middle of the music, they interrupted the broadcast to say they're broadcasting the live from Sing Sing prison, the execution of the Rosenbergs. And I started screaming. And my parents came in and said, they're killing the wrong person. They're killing the wrong person. She's innocent. She's innocent. She's innocent. And they couldn't stop me from crying and screaming and carrying on. And later they found out that she took the rap for her sister-in-law. And she really was innocent.
How old were you?
I was 8 years old. So that was blood-curdling. And it always left me feeling a great distrust for the government, a great distrust. How could you kill innocent people?
Mm.
The next thing, I remember I got a little job as I always had to work because our family was rather poor. I got a job delivering newspapers in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, and then after school. So one morning I looked up in an area that I was very familiar with and had some palm trees, and one of the palm trees was on fire. I mean, it looked like it was on fire, but it was not. And I looked at the other palm trees. I looked, and then I walked around and looked, and it was on fire, but it was like the burning bush. I had heard about the burning bush, but this was the burning bush for me. I said, something is trying to tell me something. Something is trying to inform me about something. So very early on, I realized that I had two kinds of education. I had the education that I was learning in school, and then I had the education that life was giving me, and I had the education that my mother, who was a mystic, referred me to. And my father had been an actor who always appreciated the English language, or I should say good acting and everything. We had a wonderful collection of books. And so one of the things he said, well, I'm tired of dragging you down to the library to bring all these books, and if you don't turn them back, you have to pay fines. So he bought me an Encyclopedia Britannica for Christmas, 24 volumes. I had it all read within a year, the whole thing, front to back.
You were a sponge.
A sponge, exactly, a sponge. I could not get enough information about life, what was what, who was who, what was going on. And my father did like politics more than I did, but I mean, so be it. The other thing was my sense of the sacred. My father used to take me around to different churches. He said, well, I have to give you a proper religion. I mean, he wanted to be a Catholic, but nobody in the family wanted to be. So he took me to all these churches that had summer schools for Bible study. And I went around to all of them. And as it turned out, my favorite was the Jewish synagogue. I thought they had the best take on the whole bit. And so I had a lot of Jewish friends as a kid. And they were very spiritual, and they were very supportive of me as a child. And they were just lovely people. And those early friendships that I had with spiritual people, and the Jews were the most spiritual of all. So that was one of my first bondings with a school kid my age, you know, in grade school, all the way through high school. And then I knew another boy whose parents were Lutheran ministers, but they were very, very tight. You know, they didn't accept anything that was outside of there.
It's very interesting to hear you say that, because it sounds and it feels so progressive that you were in this position of actually having a choice,
Yeah.
and thinking about this, and
That's right.
and having a certain background or a foundation within yourself spiritually.
Absolutely.
To be able to say, I like this or that.
Right. So
So
then we went down to the Episcopalian Church, which is the American name for the Anglican Church in America.
Mm.
We had the Reverend H.G. Battershill, and he was very English. And we always used to say that when they dipped the flags and sang America, he always sang God Save the King. But, you know, I mean, he was very much traditionalist. I became an altar boy and did all that stuff. I loved the music. I loved the traditions. My father used to have a joke about, he says, what he liked about it was that at a certain point, the minister says, we will all confess our sins on page 6. Oh, all your sins are on page 6?
Yeah.
My. Mine would take at least 10 more pages.
Well, you remember the gossip columns were also on page 6 in the newspapers. They were confessing too.
So I thought, and then I liked all the English people, and that after church they used to have some kind of little coffee and snacks or something like that, cakes or whatever it was. So I liked British people quite a lot. They seemed very civilized.
Did it seem familiar to you?
And familiar. That's what I want to say.
Yes.
Very familiar to me. So jumping from that on to what happened in my education, I had these wonderful teachers in school who always would say, you know, you're quite a remarkable young man.
Now, this is elementary school.
Elementary school, yes. And one who kind of followed me on into high school and everything. She used to know the family. And Olive Miller, I remember, she was very sweet. And I had a third grade school teacher. And there's where I met this man by the name of John Darash, which was a Hungarian name. And he was teaching music in the States because he was a refugee from Europe in World War II.
And where were you living at this time?
I was in Oakland.
In
My
Oakland.
family was
That's
born
where
and
you're
raised
born
in
and
Oakland.
raised
That's
there.
born and raised in Oakland. And I had heard this woman. She was also a teacher, and I walked up the street and I heard this beautiful sound coming out of a house, and she was a woman practicing the cello with the front door open of this little cottage that she lived in. And I wandered up, and I said, "Oh, what are you playing?" And then she talked to me and she said, "Would you like to come in and listen?" And so I became madly in love with the cello. So then I talked to Dr. Darash, who said, "Well, you're too small for cello. We'll have to start you on the violin." Hated every minute of it. Squeak, squawk, you know. I didn't have aptitude. But the cello, I thought, was just right. And I actually bonded with the instrument, and they lent me one from the a school department had lending instruments to young people who couldn't afford them.
So your family play?
My father played the piano and sang, and my mother had played the piano.
And was he kind of a musical theater actor, or
More of that, yeah. Yeah.
as he was singing and playing in the house?
He was singing and playing in the house. He liked to do that whenever I wanted to practice. He would always start to compete with me. My father and I had a very difficult competitive relationship about who was right, who was wrong, who was this, and what was that.
Did you have siblings?
I had, indeed. I had an older brother and then a younger brother. And then later on, there were two more siblings that were added into the whole thing. So there were a total of 5 children. We didn't fit well in the same house. And I was very fond of my older brother, and I followed him around like he was my hero. And he introduced me to many fine things. He became a guitar maker of some note. He's listed in books. But he became a born-again Christian.
Huh.
After all of this.
But it's interesting, right? Because it still is this inclination for wanting to connect to that which is, you might say, beyond us, or
yes, absolutely,
the divine energy.
But of course, the minute he became a born-again Christian, all I got from him on the telephone were sermons.
Judgment.
Complete with biblical reference points. You know, Matthew 12:18 or whatever it was attached to it. And I got tired of being preached to. I had moved to New York by that time that we split. He introduced me to things like flamenco dancing and guitar playing, and I went to Spain and got all to that. Music of ethnic types always interested me. So what happened was he began to preach to me, and I said, you know what? I don't let anybody preach to me. I'll learn my lessons as I learn them, but not from you. Thank you very much. If you have anything other than this if you have something other than this to say, I'll talk to you about it. But if this is it, we've spoken the last. And that was the last time I spoke to him until after my mother died.
Really?
Yeah. And my younger brother.
Well, that's your Aries. Let him have it. Yeah.
He is born Aquarius. I had a natural affinity for him, the 11th of February. Now, my younger brother was born within a day of my father and the same ego problems. And the thing was, my father had been physically abusive to me as a child also. There was sexual abuse within the family. Mm-hmm. And I think after I distanced myself from my father, he sort of let my younger brother be the darling of the family. I'll sum it all up by saying that after 5 children, my mother got tired of having him constantly find fault with her. So my mother always had a lot of gay friends. It was very interesting. And it turned out that my father, after she said, I don't want any more of you, he got himself a boyfriend. And so it ended with him And I didn't stay with them at that point. I had moved to New York, and I only went back for his funeral. Um, I think my father was a very tragic person. I think he was a person who had a lot of possibilities. The war intervened in his career. And when people came back to see him from New York and Los Angeles and saying, well, we want to get you back in time to have a real career. My mother, who had moved to Oakland from a little town in the northern state of California, said, if you're going to go to New York, you'll go alone because I'll stay here with the children. And he wouldn't go. So then, of course, he had a perfect reason to blame my mother and all of his children for having ruined his life.
Did you feel that you were an empath in that family? And looking back now, I know that word wasn't used then, but were you also, in a sense, processing the emotions of the family?
Well,
a lot of
I was very conscious of it. I was very conscious of it. And I said, I've got to leave home as soon as I can. And so when I first moved from home, I went to Mexico, where I played in an orchestra. I was age 17. My father was just filing for bankruptcy. And he says, I hope you can get yourself a job. I can't afford to keep you. I don't know if keeping me was exactly the right word to use, because it was like being kept in a doghouse. But anyway, so a friend of mine, who was a fellow musician, calls me up and says, how'd you like to go to Mexico? I said, well, go to Mexico? I got to get a job. He says, I'm talking about a job. He says, I just played for a Mexican conductor and he hired me and he's looking for other players. 3 weeks later, I was in Mexico.
Where?
Stayed for a year. Jalapa, Veracruz.
And so there was a classical music or classical...
They had an orchestra, Orquesta Sinfónica de Jalapa.
And so you had audience for this music.
Oh, yes. Well, it was a university town. Mexicans are very knowledgeable about classical music. They have some famous Mexican composers.
So what year are we talking now?
We're talking about 1961, so thereabouts, 60, 61. So I left, I went down there, and the Mexicans could not have been kinder to me, more helpful to me, and they basically adopted me. Here I am, sort of a teenage kid running around not knowing much, and they sort of mentored me in a very kind way.
So music is the guiding force in your life.
Absolutely.
Carrying you, it's also, and guiding you. But during that time, were you having experiences that were psychic?
All the time.
Okay.
All the time.
How did you understand this, and how did you compartmentalize this?
Well, I knew that I was a very good guesser.
When did that start, and how? I'd like to hear some things that you quote-unquote guessed.
Well, I mean, the first one, of course, was Ethel Rosenberg. But, I mean, I knew something was true or it was false. And I could say that's false or that's true. And that's why my father said you should become a minister, you'll have a captive audience. And he meant that in a very snide way.
Well, you probably had read him and said things you don't
lots of times. Lots of times.
That he was shocked at, probably.
Yes, yes. So I made a real decision that Oakland was too small for me and my father's home was too small for me. So I decided I'm not coming back. I came back for a few visits while my father was still alive. His funeral when he died, and he died at the age of 51, very young. And then I was very close to my mother's family, who were very intuitive, and my mother's father, who I think had somehow, he liked my father, and they sort of encouraged the marriage, which actually was not a good marriage, as it were. But the thing was that my grandfather, who had always wanted a musician in the family, and had taught himself to play the violin by himself, and used to play at barn dances and country dances, violin for country fiddling. He gave me his violin at a certain point. He says, I can't play this anymore because I have arthritis in my fingers. I want you to take this violin, which turned out to be a decent instrument, and trade it in on a cello so that you have one of your own. And he gave it to me when I visited him, and I went down to Oakland. I'll never forget, and I got this cello that I was so proud of, that my granddad had given me, and that made me want to play even more and more and more.
Passing of the torch to you.
Yes, and I loved playing. he also was a collector of records, as I am, which I think it runs in families. He had a wall, big wall, covered with records, old-fashioned 78 records. They didn't have LP records in those days.
How did music inform the channeling?
Well, music is largely a channeled experience on the part of composers. And when performers play really well, they don't play exactly what's written on the page. I have my favorites. I mean, those I think really are channels, like Itzhak Perlman. I really feel is a great genius channeling music of all kinds, classic, Jewish traditional music, everything. And he was a child prodigy. A lot of musicians are child prodigies.
Who did you feel were the channels that spoke to you through music?
Well, I channeled Franz Joseph Haydn once, and I was very proud of that. He was a great teacher and he was one of the great musical forces.
I mean, like when you were hearing their music, you knew this was channeled, and now looking back,
who was the first one? I knew that.
Yes.
Ray Vaughan Williams.
And how and why? I'd love to hear that.
He was the most mystical composer I had ever heard. The other one was Alan Hovhaness. And Alan Hovhaness was part Scottish parent and I forget what the other one was. It was a Middle Eastern, Armenian and Scottish. Produced this amazing composer. And I heard this, I said, this is channeled music. Anyone who ever hears this piece called Mysterious Mountain or any Hovhaness piece is going to hear something channeled. Vaughan Williams, most of his works are channeled. And some of his most famous works, the Fantasia and the theme of Thomas Tallis, is played all the time. He is like a hugely popular composer. But he's not played in live concerts here much, but a lot of recordings. I was a great fan. And I got to know his wife when I went to England. I had written to her, and I got to know her and all about him and their relationship. He married twice. The first wife had arthritic, what do you call it? What's that terrible type of arthritis? Was just
rheumatoid.
Yeah. Anyway,
Rheumatoid arthritis.
Rheumatoid. Yeah, she was in a wheelchair. And so this woman who wrote poetry, Ursula Wood, became his lyricist and did a number of pieces with him. And after 30 years, they married after his first wife died. And I got to know her. I spent many times in her house in London and I got to know all about him and everything else. So that was a very great connection. And the other composer was Holst, without a question. Gustav Holst, who wrote The Planets, not about the astral, or not about the actual planets, but about the signs of the planets. And so each one of the planets has it, like
from the planets to Mysterious Mountain.
That's Holst is the Mysterious Mountain.
Yeah,
I was attracted by mystical music. Yes. Absolutely.
So it was thematically mystical, but then there was something in the vibration of it that you could recognize.
The other one was certain singers had a sound about their voice that was immediately recognizable. I fell in love with the sound of an English mezzo-soprano by the name of Janet Baker. Janet Baker had learned, she was born of a relatively poor Yorkshire family. She started singing in church as a child. And she'd only had one teacher. And this voice of hers had such a unique sound that you could identify it within a couple of notes. Mm. And I think I have everything she ever recorded, both on vinyl and on CDs. Everyone I've ever played her for, played her singing for, has said, that's the most remarkable singer I've ever heard.
Do you think music was your first teacher into how to surrender to the channeling energy?
Yes, absolutely. And Janet wrote a book about her life after she retired from the operatic world and she just became a singer of songs. Because somebody had said to her when she said that she was always worried about giving a perfect performance, which is something I worried about when I became a channel. a friend of hers said, you know, the reason you have this problem is because you forget why you sing in the first place. And she said, Janet, when you first started to sing, you didn't sing for audiences. You didn't sing for reviews. You didn't sing for anything except for the pleasure of singing.
Yeah, the feeling.
And you must go back to that. And then you will enjoy singing and not be afraid of perfect performance, not giving perfect performances. My worst fear when I eventually became a channel was somebody would come over and tap me on the shoulder and say, Alex, you're asleep. You're snoring. You're not channeling. You're just sound asleep. That was a fear. That was one of the things that held me back from public channeling.
Yes. I had that fear.
Scary. Scary.
What if
You're
you
not
come out
channeling,
trying
just snoring. Yeah.
No one's left in the room.
Yeah,
You're just
exactly.
looking around.
Exactly. So that, I share a lot of performance issues that I feared with musicians. Where I overcame them was not in channeling, but in public speaking.
Mm.
Although that became channeling and I didn't even know it.
Right, because
My
conscious versus...
My teacher, Clifford Bias, had this little church. And that's when I came to New York, and I wasn't even 20 years of age. I went to this little spiritual church in what is now the Ansonia.
Well, I have to break this down, and you have to break this down about how it went from touring musician, going down to Mexico.
Well, I went and I came back and forth. I traveled a lot, but the time sequence was, I just want to say this.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't have an exact timeline, but he says, I want you to come down and speak in the church on Sunday. I said, how long? I said, what shall I speak about? He said, speak about 20 minutes. Hello. So I went down with little cards I'd written notes on, and I looked at the cards and I said everything. After the first time I did that, I couldn't read the cards anymore.
Well, Clifford Bias was this well-known,
very famous psychic and teacher.
And he channeled as well.
Yeah.
So how did you come about meeting Clifford Bias? Walk us through that.
Well, okay, I met somebody. I have all these accidents. I meet somebody at a party who was a very good reader and did a little palmistry and asked me my birth date and this and that and the other thing. And I said, you're really good. He says, oh, well, I studied with this guy by the name of Clifford Bias. If you really want to learn something, you got to go see him. So I did. Clifford Bias starts a reading for me. He says, you're going to be doing what I'm doing one day. I said, if I knew what you were doing, I would help. He says, you'll find out.
Now, did you know the word channeling at this point?
We didn't use it. It was being a medium.
Uh-huh.
A medium was still the word. Okay. I said, well, I don't know. I said, if I knew what you're doing, it would help. He says, you're going to find out. That was the answer. So I started going to his classes. And one day I said to Clifford, I said, I'm not getting a lot out of your classes because I think I'm sleeping through half of it. He says, that's just because you're going into trance. So all of a sudden, and I found that when I was at Agatha's, I'd be sitting there and then all of a sudden my arm starts to do this. It's moving around. It's doing all kinds. I said, Agatha, what's happening to my body? She says, your spirits are taking it over. They're moving it.
Was Agatha your first teacher?
First. I studied with him second. They knew each other. They knew each other.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. She says, you go to Clifford, and Clifford will tell you what's going on.
So the story of Agatha, who is this remarkable figure in psychic work and in art.
Yeah.
Because she was a painter as well as a healer and a psychic. And
Absolutely.
How did you come about meeting her?
I picked up a guy in a bar, and we went home with him. We played around, and the next day he was telling me about this wonderful spiritual teacher he went to, and he thought I should go and meet her, and that was how I went there with him.
All of these connections, looking back, they seem to be where these, just by chance I happened to...
My life has been by chance. Later on people say, well, how did you go from here to there? I said, somebody asked me.
Yeah.
I backed into every job I ever did. I backed into everything. I didn't walk into something looking for it. It looked for me. And so many times it seemed like an accident. Like I was telling you earlier about falling down in the street, and it just happened to be for a policeman there to pick me up and put me in an ambulance.
Yes.
It just happened. or did it?
Mm.
Do you believe in accidents, or do you believe in something that happens at its right time?
Well, your mom being psychic, did she ever speak about this in a way that was a serious conversation to you, or was it sort of...
I only knew by the book she read. Her favorite book was the Tibetan Book of the Dead. That's pretty out there, isn't it?
You're talking the 50s where the book was Joy of Cooking was the book.
Yeah, right.
She would read the Tibetan.
No, I like Julia.
You like
Child.
that?
I like Julia Child. But I like the fact that she improv'd everything she ever cooked.
Now, what about your siblings? Did they have any intuitive gifts? Your brother had an inclination for some type of spirituality for himself.
The rest of them, not really.
Huh.
And I was very separated by age. My youngest brother and sibling, he was 15 years younger than me, and she's 17 years younger than me.
17-year difference.
So I don't even know them. I don't even know them or care to.
Oh, okay.
So I basically made New York my home, and all my friends became my family. My teachers became my family. Everything became my family. So
New York was for music.
Was for music, yes.
Okay.
And I had
what particular about New York? Was there a job here in New York, or was it a teacher?
I came down to New York so that I could study with Stuart Sankey, who was a very famous teacher of the double bass.
Okay. How often were you practicing and learning from him?
He stammered, interesting enough. And I've known many people who stammered, and all my favorite people have been stammerers, including Biden, King George VI.
Yes.
Stammerers.
Yeah.
I have a history with stammerers. So I met Stuart through my teacher who knew him and referred me to him. I'll never forget, I went to his home, was up by Juilliard, not very far. And in those days, a good lesson with a good teacher was at least $25 or $30.
Oh, wow.
In those days. Well, there's a lot more now, 100 or more. So he said, I want you to come in and see me on a certain date. And he had Oriental rugs all over his floors. It was kind of dark inside, and I smelled incense, and it was a little kind of woo, you know. And he had this stutter, you know. So he sat me down on a stool and handed me an instrument to play. He says, play for me. La, la, la. And he waited for a while, and he said, la, la, la. You have real talent. I teach you. So we started the lesson, and I liked this guy. He was really strange. But anyway, when the lesson was over, I said, how much do I owe you? He said, $7.
Oh.
$7 for an hour and a half.
Right. Right.
So I could afford him. He got me into Juilliard, but I couldn't afford to go because I couldn't get a musical scholarship.
Oh.
And that's why I had to go working all the time. That's when I started taking tours and working. I did freelance jobs around town. But
wait, I have to ask about that. What were your freelance jobs like? Or were they all music? Or
mostly, well, I'll tell you what it was. It was substituting for, I used to play for various ballet companies. I would travel with them, so it was ballet music.
Okay, so it was actually all music related. You weren't doing odd jobs.
No.
Oh,
no.
So professional musician.
But became a professional musician. I had been a professional musician in San Francisco and Oakland. I had a union card, so I got my union card in local 802, New York.
Of course. Now, how old are you now? Bring this to how old you were.
I was about...
taking these lessons.
I was about 25.
So 25, you're not doing anything. Are you meditating? Are you practicing yoga? Are you doing anything that would be considered new age or spiritual?
No.
Just playing music?
No, nada.
What about the talking in your sleep? What happened to that?
Well, the only story I know about that is I'm traveling with a musical company. And they didn't have enough hotel rooms to give us each a single room. So they said, you're going to have to double up. So the trumpet player says, okay, I'll double up with you. We were friendly. The next morning, he was furious. He said, I'll never share a room with you again. You talked all night, and what's more, you gave sermons.
Of course.
Of course. Hello?
Wow.
So, a lot of this sounds like apocryphal storytelling. But the fact is, at a certain point, well, when I got back to New York, I said, I'm either really weird or I'm doing something.
Right. I want to talk about that moment.
Okay. Well, that moment came after, Agatha said you're a medium and Clifford Byers says you got talent and la, la, la. So I said, okay, I heard about this place. Guess where it was? A block and a half from where I lived, literally. And so it was called the American Society for Psychical Research.
Yes, of course.
So I wandered over there and they said, why are you here? I said, I need to know whether I'm psychic or psychotic. So, I said, are you, they said, well, we have lots of tests. We'll put you through these tests and we'll find out what you can do.
But you believed, would you say you were a full believer in psychic phenomenon, or were you in psychics?
I thought a lot of psychics that I had met or people who claimed to be psychics were half crazy.
Mm.
And a person who is diverse in my thinking and not I did not go to college. I finished high school and that was the end of my formal education, except for the teachers I studied with.
So you were just on this precarious edge of there's something here.
Something's going on.
Something's going on.
So they tested me. Not only did they test me, they found that I could do more than anybody else they were testing.
Now, what were the tests like there?
Oh, well, there were things about remote viewing. They were studying out-of-body experience, which people call astral projection.
Mm-hmm.
And they had all kinds of interesting tests. Some of them were boring, and I told them, you got to change some of this, or it's going to bore me to death.
Right.
And the leader of the whole thing, the head of it was named Dr. Carlos Osis. He was from someplace in Bulgaria or someplace. He had an accent. He said, so what do you think about this? So, it's like, God, it's like Bela Lugosi.
Right, Bela Lugosi. It's the first thing I thought of.
But I got a sense of humor. I've always had a sense of humor, and I liked him. He said he didn't have any psychic abilities, but his wife did. So he got into it because his wife was a painter, and then she was
So at that time, was the term parapsychology?
Yes, it became in vogue.
Yeah.
So he says we have lots of tests. So to make that long story fairly short, they started paying me $20 a time, which was a lot of money in those days. I paid for my food bill for the week.
They must have had a good grant.
They had a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I went over there and I did a session with them, which was an hour or two. Got me $20 and went home. They never referred anybody to anybody, but I got calls from people who said, American Psychical Research told me to call you because you're a real psychic, not a fake psychic. You're real. So
Yeah.
anyway, I'll make this short. So we went through all these tests. The last one was the best. So Osis didn't really believe in spirit guides. They knew that I did, but they were not sure because that was a little too woo-woo for them.
They approached it from a psychological or mental phenomenon.
Exactly. It's like kids who say, I have little friends who talk to me, and they say, oh yeah, everybody has little friends,
Sure.
Well, I had big friends. So the test was that it was in another room in this building, which was like an old brownstone house on another floor. And he was in this room with a seismograph wired up and these boxes hanging from the ceiling on wires and held down in the bottom with wires. So nothing could move without the seismograph charting it. Okay? I didn't know this. So they showed me into a room that was about the size of where you're sitting and where I'm sitting, and about this big, and maybe it looked like a meat locker. That's what it looked like. So I felt like a piece of meat in a locker. But there was a microphone, an intercom. And so they go in, they close the thing. I'm in there, no light, except a little tiny light that would indicate whether this thing was working or not. So next thing I hear is Osis says, so, Alex, I want you to come into the room where I am, and so we asked questions, and I said, okay, sure. You know me, I was the person that never said no. I used to joke about, there used to be a song called I'm Just a Girl That Can't Say No. That was me. Can't say no.
Yeah.
I'm willing to do anything except at the end.
Right.
So anyway, not only could I go in and see what was in the boxes, he says, oh, that's very good. You did that. Can you see the boxes? I says, can you see what is in the boxes? I described it. Whoa, that's very good. So then he gets smart and he says, why don't you see if your spirit guide can come in and do the boxes, move the boxes? I said, okay. So I said, Avataka, go show him. All of a sudden I hear this scream. Goes, oh my God, you won't believe what happened. And so he sent somebody in to get me out of this box and take me into the room where he was. And he shows me the seismograph. Every time I did something, it went, chit, 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 chit. So it identified that I was moving those boxes. When Barta went in and moved the boxes, the thing went right off it completely flew off the graph.
So these are your spirit guides. Bartha was one of them.
One of my...
And Amerkankwa is a Native American.
Right. Yes. But Barta was one that had done healing and all kinds of stuff. Who used to, by the way, somebody wanted to record me and asked me for me to channel, and I brought in Barto, and all of a sudden the whatever it was, the broadcasting thing started to just...
Now, why do you feel that happens? What is going on with spirit guides that create this?
Well, okay. What I discovered is that when you channel, you also bring through a tremendous amount of electromagnetic energy. And electromagnetic energy is very powerful. And it can move things. What I had demonstrated to them is someone that no one they had ever tested showed. It's called psychokinesis, meaning that you can move objects at a distance. Move them. Not just see them, move them. You have this power.
Yes.
That's scary stuff. So the next thing I hear from them, they said, Alex, you know, the U.S. government is very interested in your test scores.
Oh.
And they would like to see if they would work with you. You would work with them. And my answer is, I'm kind of well known for this answer. I said, there's two groups of people I will never work for. The first is the mafia, and the second is the U.S. government. And I meant it.
Yeah.
So they said, we will never tell them your name. They've seen the score, but they're really interested in you. I said, too interested is my opinion. You can't quit those organizations.
No, and there was a great deal of interest by the government at that time.
Oh, yeah.
For remote viewers.
Yeah. I said, I don't want the job. I don't want that job. That's the one job I really turned down. So by this time, I'm realizing I'm not just psychic. I have certain powers that work through me, because I used to produce apports in seances, and I didn't want them. I had to tell the spirits, don't bring any more trinkets to,
Yeah, please explain that. So we're talking physical mediumship.
Okay. Physical
describe that for people.
Well, the word,
the physical medium.
The word deport means to take something away. Apport means to bring something.
Okay.
In order to have an apport, you have to have a deport on the other end. Meaning that stuff that showed up in my groups, dark seance groups, had to come from someplace. So, mostly it was Indian arrowheads and little trinkets of one kind or another.
And they would appear. So we're speaking about...
When the lights went on, we had all this stuff all over the floor that people had been given during the seance, because I learned to work in a dark room. Later I changed that. That was one of the reasons I changed it from a dark room to a lighter room, where you could see what's going on. So anyway, so then I found out these people were coming because all they wanted us to do was see what they could get from the spirit world. And they got pissed off if somebody got something that was better than someone else or bigger than something. And one woman says, well, I don't know why they don't just get me something nice from Cartier or Tiffany's and give it, and I could use a diamond bracelet.
This is where Secret Santa started, apparently.
Yeah, that's right. Probably. So, I begin to realize that a lot of so-called spiritual people were just as greedy as anybody else and wanted to have something proven, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, this is a circus. I want no part of it. I used to have pictures jump off the wall, hit the ground, and not break the glass. I said, you know what? I don't want stuff moving around my house.
No.
I had stuff go missing on me that was in my own private drawers and stuff, and it would later appear someplace on a table, and I knew I didn't put it there. I said, I've had enough of this. If that's what this is all about, I'm retiring now. You've heard what I say. I am not doing it anymore. I felt at a little bit of the time, I felt invaded by forces I could not control. And I said, you know what? These are the terms I'm willing to work on. I will do this and I will not do that. And that became the major change in my channeling. When I decided I won't have groups in my home anymore. And the reason I won't have groups is I can't worry about how much toilet paper's in the back room and how much water is out on the table for people to drink and whether they got a comfortable chair or not. And figure out what, everything else is about. I just can't do that.
The organizational aspect of it all.
I won't do it.
We're going to get into that also, where this gift became your vocation and when you decided to do that. So we're going to talk about that.